I think we should do monkey claws. Monkey claws, call me up. Call me up and I'll grant your every wish. What do you want for Christmas? You know what I want, Carol?
I have no idea.
She says, I have no idea. What? She's afraid to ask. Well, there are a lot of things I want. There's a couple of boys in particular that are like, wow, wow. Now that's Christmas. For Christmas? Really? Okay, I'll take them. So, what? Oh yeah. What was I talking about? What was I saying? Oh yeah, I want a snow-free West Virginia mountains so I can drive through the mountains to Ohio for Christmas. That's what I want. I want global warming, locally. I want local global weirding. I know, Carol, I know what you're thinking. Carol says that it's not global warming, it's global weirding, and things get weirder. And we're on the East Coast, when it comes to global warming, what that means, more energy in the system swirling around with more chaos, more energy, more heat, right? What does that mean for the East Coast? More snow. That's what global warming means for the East Coast of the United States of America. You know what it means for Canada, Carol? Agriculture. That's what it means. That's what global weirding means for Canada. They're going to become, you know how the breadbasket of the world is central U.S.? Not anymore. Canada's going to be the breadbasket to the world. So anyway, what happens on the East Coast is more snow with global weirding. So I'm hoping for no snow, Carol. No snow so I can get through the West Virginia mountains and see my sister-in-law, my niece and nephew for Christmas. Everybody pray. No, don't bother. That don't work. Okay, so put up number 3, Carol. I have a guest. I have a guest monkey. We got a guest monkey here. Come on out. Hello. Oh, whoops. Wait, what? The worst puppet show ever. Hello. Okay, there we go. That's better. Okay. Our guest is the Southern Environmental Law Center. Oh, hello. Ow, this is hard, Carol. This is really hard. Okay. So we got the Southern Environmental Law Center. We got to talk about the Bonner Bridge. Yes, the Bonner Bridge. We object to this short-term solution. Yes, I see. This short-term solution of the Bonner Bridge. Because it's well, go ahead. Tell us your objections. Okay. So, the Bonner Bridge, short-term solution, the replacement for the Bonner Bridge is going to add 3 more bridges to an area that's already environmentally sensitive, right? So, it's a multiple bridge solution. That's what we've got. Yes. You don't like that? No. But your solution, yes, is the longest bridge in America. Is that really feasible? Well, the Department of Transportation agreed to this in 2003. Well, wait a minute. We have an ex-DOT person online who says that they didn't really. They just kind of looked at it, agreed to look at it. 17-mile-long bridge into the Sound? Really? That's huge. It is a very big project, but we could get it done for $600 million. Well, actually, the estimates really, they did kind of have a bunch of estimates that recent estimates that said closer to $1 billion. Well, it's important, yeah, it is. It is. You're talking about the Pea Island Wildlife Refuge. Oh, yeah, tell us about that. The Pea Island Wildlife Refuge, National Wildlife Refuge, in order to protect the Bonner Bridge, go ahead. They're talking about putting a bunch of other shorter bridges in there, and they haven't told us the cost for those. So they're comparing costs of your bridge, the 17-mile-long bridge, this huge undertaking that's really, almost never been done before. Well, it's been, we can do it. Okay. But they're comparing the cost of yours with their project, but they're not really telling us what their project's going to be. Right. That's the lawsuit. We're filing suit because they're dividing it up, and getting approvals in ways that the EPA doesn't allow. That's our lawsuit. We'll see. Let's hear Tony Tata's solution, or Tony Tata's contribution to the conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Southern Environmental Law Center, for coming on. Thank you. So let's hear Tony Tata's. Tony? Where's Tony? Ah. Oh, Tony. What? Thank you for joining us here on Monkey Time. Tony Tata, ladies and gentlemen, the head of the North Carolina Department of Transportation, who's also looking to run for Senate, North Carolina's Senate seat in the U.S. Senate sometime in 2016 or sometime in the future. What? Who says that? I've never announced anything like that. Oh, come on, Tony. It's clear. Tony, come on. You're sitting there running red meat, throwing red meat to the right wing. Oh, yeah, I guess I am. So, why are you doing that, Tony? Because Art Pope says I have a good chance of being a U.S. Senator someday. Aha, Tony, good job. Okay, Tony, what was your contribution to the debate? Those liberals sipping lattes, coffee. Oh, yeah, that's it, lattes, coffee, lattes sipping liberals in their air conditioning. Well, thank you, Tony Tata. Okay. That's the, ladies and gentlemen, the head of the North Carolina Department of Transportation. Yay! Yeah, I know, Carol. Let's add personal insults to political conversations about complex environmental issues and complex discussions about cost. Let's lower that conversation, right? Let's lower that with personal attacks that result in death threats coming to the offices of the Southern Environmental Law Center. Hey, come on, Tony, come back and take another bow. Oh, yes, liberals, latte sipping liberals, sitting there with their contempt in their offices. Tony, calm down. Tony, it's okay. No, it's not. Put up the number 6, Carol, if you don't mind. I'll get some more. I got a few links up. Yeah. Oh, no, number 5. I'm sorry. Number 5. Tony Tata is running for U.S. Senate in the future. Who knows when? But it's clear. Why would you throw out horrible personal insults right now if you weren't trying to excite your base? Don't let Tony Tata, remember this, monkeys. Don't let Tony Tata win a U.S. Senate seat if this is the kind of person he is. If this is the kind of man, if this is the kind of monkey Tony Tata is, to throw out personal attacks. We already know Pat McCrory's a jerk. We already know Art Pope's a jerk. Look at the Civitas Institute and the things that they've done. But Tony Tata, trying to set himself up as like some kind of, statesman-like figure from ex-military states, he's him? No. Stupid insults don't help, and last thing we need is politicians who use stupid insults. Ladies and gentlemen, keep Tony Tata out of any elected office. Let's make sure that happens, okay? Okay. So there were serious questions about the Bonner Bridge thing. 17-mile-long bridge into the Sound. There's some, I think people are raising, if you go to WUNC's page, WUNC, the State of Things had Tony Tata on, and the head of the DERB something or other, the head of the Southern Environmental Law Center, debating. And then there are comments down below. And it's got that comment thing that goes on the internet. It's like, why do that? That's just so stupid. Let's just, have a written conversation without personal attacks. Tony Tata can't do it, but we can do it. And if you want to call, feel free. The number's right there, 996-6775. But there were some good comments there, and I think some people on the coast raise interesting issues. Some people on the coast, Carol, also raised ridiculous points. One person from the coast was like, you people don't understand the huge contribution that Dare County makes to North Carolina's taxes. I'll bet Dare County contributes more in taxes than the rest of North Carolina combined. Thinking about tourism, right? Carol, think about that. This person's saying Dare County along the coast contributes more in like sales taxes and other stuff than the rest of North Carolina combined.
What is that a sign of, Carol? That's a sign of this inflated sense of importance that the mostly wealthy people who live along the coast feel about themselves. Now, not everybody's wealthy down there, and there are a lot of people who are lower level folks who are working poor, who who use the bridge to get to work and everything. And I don't buy liberals who attack those people by saying, well, you're living on an island, why don't you rent a boat? You're living in seclusion, isolated. You know, that's a very libertarian argument. Why don't you just move if the access isn't there for you? I don't like that. The government should provide services to people like that. Now, should they provide services to rich people who want to build houses right along the ocean and then, pour money into protecting those houses? That's another question. I don't know. Is the Bonner Bridge part of that? Wouldn't it be better to just not have houses along the Outer Banks and have people visit the Outer Banks and have people along the coast? I don't know. Maybe, a few miles away? I don't know. Those are legitimate questions. But the coming from liberals, the argument that, well, if you don't like living there and the access you have, you should move, I don't like that argument coming from liberals. But here's the key, or one key. Well, I won't say a key. Let me go back to this idea of the inflated importance. I'm sorry, let me back up a little bit. I was talking about the inflated importance people on the coast feel, and the idea that Dare County provides more in tax revenue than not only other counties, but the rest of North Carolina combined is just completely absurd. You went nosing around on Google, the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners site, you find analyses of total sales tax revenue. Dare County, according to the links I got, and I'll be glad to, I'm no expert on this stuff, I'm just trying to find information, I'll be glad to correct it if I'm wrong. Dare County contributed $16 million in total sales tax revenue in 2011-2012 to North Carolina. $16 million, that's not nothing, Carol. Wake County contributed how much? How much do you think? 10 times that, Carol said. Very good, Carol. $143 million just in sales tax revenue. But here's this guy at WUNC's site, and I'll link to it after the show on my Twitter page. You people don't understand how important the beach is to the economy of North Carolina. Dare County probably has more contribution in tax revenue than the rest of North Carolina combined. Dare County doesn't even come close, is a little over a tenth of what Wake County provides. So, these are the kinds of things where, and, I said it was an absurd statement, but I didn't attack the person, but corrected them and said, hey, maybe this is like kind of maybe you have a little bit of an inflated sense of the importance of the tax revenue contribution to the coast. So can we, the problem is when someone like Tony Tata comes along and throws red meat to people, by those latte-sipping liberals, contempt, he says, they feel, right? And the fact is, what Tony Tata's position doesn't acknowledge is that there's anything at all to be said for an environmentally friendly position that says, hey, maybe we ought to consider the value to future generations of places like the Pea Island Wildlife Refuge, right? Tony Tata's position is they just feel contempt, whereas other sane folks are like, no, the natural world is actually important and interesting in its own right, and we should look at that. And it usually comes down to the spotted owl versus lumber jobs, some very simplistic kind of thinking, which, again, is what Tony Tata's contributing to. This kind of idiotic, simplistic insult is exactly the kind of thing that we don't need in our leaders. Pat McCrory, I've expected nothing from. You go back and listen to Pat McCrory talking about Charlotte's light rail system, not even 3-4 years ago. He sounds like a really intelligent, relatively conservative person. That person's gone. It's all about throwing red meat to your core constituency and damning the rest. That's Pat McCrory now, and it's like weird. Who is this person? You go back and look at him just 3 or 4 years ago, the things he was saying about bringing light rail to Charlotte, or 4 or 5 years ago, right? And you look at him now, it's just, there's no other option but to just completely give up on Pat McCrory and know that there's a really good chance that Roy Cooper is going to kick his ass in the next gubernatorial election, right? Because that's not gerrymandered. The Republicans couldn't gerrymander the whole state. What they're going to try to do is what they're doing in places like Asheville, left-leaning places. They're going to limit polling places. Again, the voter ID stuff, the actual identification card is a red herring. They're all saying, the John Locke Foundation, all these people, well, we've actually made things North Carolina more in line with other states on some things. And we were ahead of the curve on things like early voting. But that's because for decades, 100 years, we were behind the curve. So now we were moving up in terms of voter access. And who would be against voter access? Well, Republicans are against voter access. Because the more poor people, the more minority people vote, the less votes Republicans get. So they're just against access. I'm not talking about the voter ID requirement. I'm not going to object to that. I don't like it. I think it's ridiculous, but I'm not going to object to it. European countries do it. I'm not going to object to it. But shutting down polling places so that there's one polling place for Asheville, and then not allowing people to vote if they're in line after the polls close, this is what it looks like we're going to see in 2014. People being turned away from the polls after the Republicans closed polling places. And remember, Republicans now control the local boards of elections. That sets things like polling places and polling hours, or not polling hours, but where the precincts are, right? This is what they're doing. They're going to try to shut down polling places in areas where people who vote Democratic tend to live. Now, the John Locke Foundation can scream all it wants about how their voting law changes have made us more in line with other countries, but there is no excuse for making Asheville have one polling place that's going to be super crowded and knowing that that's going to turn people away. John Hood, you can't look at your damn face in a mirror and tell me that there's any legitimate purpose for that other than suppressing the vote. And that's the kind of thing we need to look at in the voting suppression law that the Republicans passed last year, or this year. That's the kind of thing. Don't focus on the ID. Like I said, I'm not gonna fight on that issue. There's a reasonable argument for including it, but it also benefits Republicans, but it clearly benefits Republicans, but that doesn't mean there aren't reasonable reasons for including it. I think they're minor and silly, and that the voter suppression element should overshadow it, but they won on that one. I'm not gonna fight that. But the other stuff that they included in this law, the anti-student stuff, right? Shutting down polling places in left and liberal-leaning areas, there's no excuse for any of that, no justification for any of that. All right, so here comes Tony Tata, right? And so Pat McCrory, screw him. He's the lost cause. And hopefully Roy Cooper will be able to kick his ass completely out of the governor's mansion. It's still going to be really tough for Roy Cooper to be governor with a completely Republican House and Senate, but we'll see. And maybe we can break through after a couple of elections so that the Republicans don't have veto-proof majorities, in the House and Senate, right? That's the goal. We're not going to get a Democratic majority in either the House or Senate, but maybe we can get closer to having to breaking through the veto-proof majority in the House and Senate. Make sense? That would matter a lot. So that's a good goal to work towards. So here comes Tony Tata, right? Just completely ignoring any kind of idea that protecting the Pea Island Wildlife Refuge is even worthy of discussion in the discussion over the Bonner Bridge.
We have 6 minutes. 4 o'clock?
That's what Tony Tata's contribution is. Insults about latte-sipping liberals with their contempt in their air-conditioned office. Meanwhile, that was Tony Tata expressing contempt from his air-conditioned office. All right, Carol says we should maybe move on. Can we talk about Mandela? It's hot under these lights, man. Nelson Mandela, all these world leaders were at his funeral. Did you hear about the sign language? Of course you heard about the sign language guy, right? Yeah, how insulting was that?
How did that happen?
Carol says, how did that happen? It's the reason it's embarrassing for South Africa is that clearly, there's a problem in South Africa with a basic problem that this guy who could do sign language at an African National Congress convention in 2012, get objections from the deaf community in South Africa, and then still be the guy who does sign language. He didn't know sign language. And Carol, did you know that until the 80s, I read this in the Washington Post today, until the 80s, there was different sign languages for black and white people in South Africa? And so maybe this is partly a legacy of that lack of education of black deaf people during apartheid. And I thought that was interesting in the Washington Post. But also clearly, this guy's got to be somebody's brother, right? Yeah. Or sister-in-law, or yeah, or what? Yeah, he knows something. No, it's generally, I mean, it's clearly this guy's completely incompetent. And how much, you got to admire his balls. He's in front of the world, either that or his ego. He's in front of the world knowing he doesn't know jack about sign language, and just 4 hours, Carol. 4 hours, this mofo just, oh God, stunning. So clearly the reason South Africa's embarrassed about this is that this is some kind of sign of corruption. That's my guess. If I'm wrong, I'll retract that. But that's my guess about how does someone like that get the job? He just wants to be on stage with Obama, right? Anyway, but the deeper issue is the way that a lot of the coverage and a lot of the kind of everybody, Israel was up on stage there, and Obama and the United States. But what they whitewash is that Israel in particular was very close with the apartheid regime. They both saw themselves as these outlaw regimes, or at least not very well liked regimes. They didn't see themselves as outlaw, but they knew they were being, put upon. And Israel, there were arms deals between the apartheid regime and Israel. There was a long history of support from right-wing Israeli governments of the apartheid regime in South Africa. And yet there they are, Mandela, Nelson Mandela, same thing with the United States. It's one of those things that gets conveniently forgotten as we all kind of surround. Now some conservatives are objecting, Carol. They're objecting to Nelson Mandela because he did attacks on civilian populations. The ANC did for a while. He renounced the violence eventually, but he felt he was driven to it by the apartheid government. And boy, if you don't know anything about apartheid, you really ought to look at what was happening there during that time. Right? They were using things like, the hair. It was racial discrimination at its worst just 20, 30 years ago. 30 years ago, right? Just stunning, obnoxious, evil racial discrimination with black folks getting crap and white folks getting all this assistance and money from the government. And the separation was enforced with bullets. That's apartheid, ladies and gentlemen. Let's just not forget that. And the rebels in your world, if you were at the bottom, conservatives, you would be fighting with guns. We know you'd be fighting with guns because you talk about it. Don't let them come after me, right? Rebels, conservatives, you would have been with the ANC on that if you were receiving from the government what the ANC was receiving from the government, what black people in South Africa were receiving. But now suddenly, Carol, the conservatives, some anyway, seem to have woken up to this idea that, maybe attacks on civilians might be, attacks that involve civilians might be bad. Yeah, unless you're a drone and you're attacking terrorists in Pakistan, right? Unless you're a drone pilot. Yeah, so it's great suddenly to see conservatives remembering that, hey, maybe civilian ancillary casualties, or what do they call it? Collateral damage, isn't such a good thing. So suddenly they're going after Mandela for that, Nobody's, you can't whitewash the violence in the African National Congress. And certainly we won't even talk about Winnie Mandela. There's some real serious questions about the way she kind of wielded her power while her husband was in prison. You've heard about this, right? Yeah, I'm not going to ignore that. But like murders and things, that's the serious questions we're talking about. Like unjustified murders. But anyway, so the show's almost ending, but don't let them whitewash the history of compliance with the apartheid government in the United States, in Israel, and in other circles in the United States, right? That stuff was there, it was real, and now, you know, everybody's like, oh, Mandela, he was our hero, Madiba, or whatever. That's just, don't let them fool you. All right, what'd you say? All right, we could talk about the video of the beating in the Wake County jail, but we'll just say take care of each other, and we'll see you next week.